hello to everybody who's just joined us. Hello, welcome. We're just going to make a couple of minutes for more people to arrive. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. But we'll just let a few more people work their way through the waiting room. Oh yeah, there are more people joining us now. So just
There's Marlena.
hold fire.
Hi, Marlena. Catherine. Oh, it's very exciting.
Hi, Uli.
That's Jill. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Mia.
Jane. Hi. Hi, Jane.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Look at the mirror.
Hello.
Hi, Stella. There's
Hey, Janet.
so many people.
Hello.
Oh, hi, Mia.
Oop.
So many people. Brilliant.
Oh, I'm going into gallery. Can I do that? Yay.
Hi, Louise.
Hey.
Hi, Louise.
Oh.
Hiya, Jane. Nice jumper.
Thanks. Yeah, me and Uli have got the memo about the yellow jumper.
Oh, all right.
Oh no, was it supposed to be a yellow jumper?
No.
Yeah, afraid so.
I haven't got one.
Yeah. Could have had
Hi, Deborah Miller.
Jane. Hi from LA. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Wow.
Great to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Hi from Brixton.
Oh,
Round the corner.
Hi
Sorry.
from Belgium.
Oh, hi from Belgium. Hello,
Hi.
Jen, who I only know on Twitter.
Hi from Vienna. How Marie-Louise? How Jill? Alison.
Hello, Marlena.
Hi,
Hi,
Marlena.
hi, hi.
Hi, Marlena.
Hi.
Hi, hello from Northern California.
Oh,
Hey, Jill.
Hi,
Nice to
Jill.
see you.
Natalie.
Woo.
All right, so I'm not seeing too many more people waiting in the wait room, so I think we're gonna kick off gently and see how we go. Maybe from this point onwards, if you've unmuted yourselves, maybe just pop yourself back on mute so we don't have a distraction from Stella and from Jane and from.
but leave your smiley faces if you don't mind, because otherwise it's weird for us. It's like we're talking into a void.
No, we'd love to see you, please. Yeah. Anyway, it's so exciting how much interest there has been in tonight's event. So thank you all so much for joining us. Hi, my name's Uli, and I'm a bookseller here at Gauge the Word Bookshop in London, where I am beaming to you from. The bookshop's turned into a bit of a sort of online order fulfillment warehouse, but it's really nice to still be coming into work and sending books out into people's lives during this second lockdown. So the shop is doing well, and we're all well here, so thank you. My pronouns are he, him, and for those of you who'd like a visual description, I'm a cis white guy. I have blue eyes, and underneath my dirty red cap, I have messy blonde hair and an angular Polish jawline. I'm wearing a bright red custard jumper, and behind me there are some copies of the book that we're all here to talk about this evening. Before we move on, I just wanted to take a brief moment to acknowledge and mark the news that came through today about the passing of Jan Morris, the historian and travel writer, who's passed today on what is International Transgender Day of Remembrance. I first discovered Jan when I was a teenager reading about the ascent of Everest, and then later when I came to work at Gauge the Word, discovering her book Conundrum. So I just wanted to take a moment to honor Jan, who's on her final ascent. So this event is being recorded this evening, just to let you know, and the plan is to broadcast it later. We're going to have introductions, readings and conversation with Jane and with Stella. If there's something that comes up in the discussions this evening that arouses your curiosity, please make a note of it. There will be time for questions later on, which you can participate in both by writing them in the comments section, and also we hope if there is time to participate audibly in the actual event and ask your questions. But if we could try and do it using the raised hands function, just to keep a little bit of order, that would be great. If not, a bit of chaos will be fine, I'm sure. I'll go over the process for the Q&A after Jane and Stella have spoken. Tonight's event is about the life and story of an amazing woman, brought to us through readings and discussions by two amazing women. And these discussions are in turn based on a book which was first published in 2000 in German by two women, Ines Rieder and Diana Voigt. Sadly, neither of these authors are alive today, but to connect us with them and the story they have captured in this book, I'm now going to hand over to Alison Reed, who was a longtime friend and colleague of the book's co-author, Ines. Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Uli. A huge thanks to everyone at Gaze the Word for their enthusiasm and support and the work they did to make this event happen. You can buy the book through Gaze the Word, through their mail order section. There has been a glitch in the trade distribution in Europe and the UK. So, oh, that was a slip. Gaze the Word has copies, so get them from there, and please keep supporting your local independent bookshops. So important, especially at this time. Welcome to everyone, faces I know, faces I don't know, faces from the past. It's great. It's very sort of appropriate that for a book by Ines and Diana that it's such an international audience. It's totally fitting. Ines and I met in 1980 through books, through publishing, and through the women's movement. And we kept on talking and meeting for the next 35 years. I never did meet Diana, sadly. Ines loved to do research. She loved to work in archives and libraries, and especially by talking with people. She was a very, very good listener and had an extraordinary memory. She was always making connections. I remember when she was doing research about abortion in Austria in the 1950s, she came across all this evidence in the police files about lesbians who were living underground and beneath any known radar. Anyone who's interested, all the tapes from research on the story of Sidonie C are at the Freud Museum in Vienna. So that is, I don't know, you probably have to book an appointment or something, but you can get in touch. Ines took huge pleasure and was very skilled at sharing the information she uncovered, telling the people who she knew would be interested. She was a generous and very sharp researcher. When she and Diana were meeting with Sidonie and taping the interviews, Ines would take Sidonie out into Vienna on expeditions. On the outings was to the old Cafe Willendorf, the gay and lesbian house, the Rosa Lilla Villa. Isn't that what we'd like to do in our 80s? Maybe not, who knows. Another memorable time, Ines and Sidi were riding the U-Bahn, and two young women sat down in front of them. Sidi stared at their legs and said very loudly, because she was already quite deaf, "Look what beautiful legs they have." I always love that story. This evening, the discussion is centered on the analysis between Sidonie and Freud and the impact of that both on Sidonie and on Freud. The book is far more than that. It's a history of the 20th century, of anti-Semitism, of women, class, and through Sidonie's life, a picture of the different societies into which she did and didn't fit. A few more thank yous to Catty from Helena History Press, the publisher, to Jill Hannum, who's there. Hello, Jill, who worked with Ines on the English translation and continued the work, and also did the absolutely crucial task of finding Catty to publish the book. And also a big thanks to Marlene Rodriguez for her support and friendship, and to all of them for answering my emails swiftly and generously. And of course, a big thank you to our two speakers who I'd like to introduce. Stella Duffy is an award-winning writer, over 70 short stories, 14 plays, both written and devised, and 17 novels published in 15 languages. It's very impressive stuff. She's worked in theatre for over 35 years as an actor, director, playwright, and facilitator. She's a co-founder of the Fun Palaces campaign, supporting community-led culture as a catalyst for connection. She's also a yoga teacher and is training to be an existential psychotherapist. Her latest novel, Lullaby Beach, will be published by Virago in February 2021. Jane Czyzselska is a psychotherapist and writer. From 2004 to 2017, she was editor of Diva magazine, the magazine for lesbian and bi women and non-binary folk. She currently writes for various websites, publications, and journals, and is working on her first book about queer therapy. Jane and I have worked together to get publicity and reviews for the Story of Sidonie C. I've enjoyed that, Jane. Thank you. And over to you now.
Oh, thanks, Alison. And thanks again to Uli and to Stella and to everyone for being here today. It's really great that there's so much interest in this story, and it's so, I'm pretty excited actually that it's we managed to get this sorted in 100 years exactly since Freud wrote his paper on the lesbian patient. Before I go on though, I want to just let you know that my pronouns are she, her. And for those who'd like a visual description, I'm a white cis woman with curly blonde hair and an undercut. I'm wearing lipstick, big round black glasses that make me look like a lesbian David Hockney. I'm wearing a bright yellow sweatshirt and I'm sitting at my desk in front of some books and some framed pictures of some queer icons. So Stella and I are going to read a couple of extracts about the lesbian patient's analysis of Freud and then talk about them a bit. And then we're going to read a couple more extracts about sex and chat about that too.
Sex as an analysis from the book too. I'm Stella, hello. My pronouns are she and her, and I am a 5'2" cis woman. I'm 57, and we can see that in my once red hair that is now blonde white, and my freckles that are very faded. And I am wearing lipstick unusually. I think it might be the 4th time since lockdown, and it goes with my very red jumper, which will at some point no doubt go with my very red hot flush. Having been menopausal since I was 36, they've weirdly and upsettingly come back with a vengeance after 21 years. So those of you out there going, yay, it's all over, I'm here to tell you it might come back after 21 years. Yay! Interestingly, despite the fact that we get the story of Sidonie C way into her 90s, we don't know anything about her menopause. Seriously and genuinely, it is a question that I want all of us to be writing about more often and more honestly, because the silence around who we are and what our bodies do is heartbreaking. And as queer women, it's a great thing to embrace. You want to read some sex then, Jane? Oh no, Freud, we're doing Freud, aren't we?
Freud, Freud sex. Freudian slip, huh? I'm not an expert on Freud, but I have been fascinated about the paper he wrote about the mysterious lesbian patient with no name. Very unusually, he didn't give a name at all to the lesbian patient. So people have written about her and, you know, referred to her as the ghost. And there's something very kind of erasing and you know, dehumanizing about that. She doesn't get a pseudonym. So reading this book and learning more about her life through her lens rather than his has been, you know, really illuminating. Yeah, it's been interesting to find out a bit more about her through her story, and then to discover that my grandmother was her first lesbian lover was mind-blowing. But we'll talk more about that later. So the authors gave the lesbian patient the pseudonym of Sidonie or Sidonie Stalag. Sidonie was a popular girl's name in the early 1900s, and Stalag is Hungarian for star. So in the readings use Sidi, but when I talk about her, I might also use her birth name, Margarethe or Gretel, because I want her to be more fully visible. So in this first extract, we meet Sidi / Gretel in Vienna, in Austria in 1919. It's shortly after the end of the First World War, and Sidi is the second of 4 children born to a very wealthy upper-class Hungarian couple. She's Jewish born. Her family converted to Catholicism because of the virulent anti-Semitism of the time. And also to give you a bit more of a sort of political temperature check, at this time, under Austrian law, lesbianism has been criminalized since the 1850s and punishable by up to 5 years in jail. Also, Jews weren't permitted to even live in Vienna until the mid-1800s. So here's Sidi at the Bohemian artist hangout Café Herrenhof in central Vienna, where she meets with her beloved Baroness Leonie von Puttkammer. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? After her daily sessions of analysis. Thank you. And Leonie's a controversial high society figure because she has sex for money and she's known to prefer women. Sidonie crosses her arms on the table and bends over them until her head almost touches its surface. Just imagine, for some time now, he's been asking me in great detail about my parents and my brothers. He was particularly keen on the youngest one in the last session. And do you know what he told me today? That I would have liked to have had a child with my father. And because my mother had the child, I hate her and my father as well. And that's why I turn away from men altogether. It's completely outrageous. Leonie breaks into peals of laughter and a few heads turn toward their table. I've heard all kinds of tales, but never that a 19-year-old girl wants to have a child with her father and therefore hates her mother. Admit it, Sidi, you are a bit perverted. Oh, he's such a creep, a disgusting brute. He has the dirtiest fantasies a human being can have, always talking about this subconscious. She puts both hands over her eyes for a moment. By now, he ought to realize that I'm as innocent as a 5-year-old. I don't understand why he's gotten so famous. And it goes on for several minutes or more. Leonie is both amused and touched. She's never seen Sidi so angry and hurt. This well-behaved girl has a temper and she likes that, although it still takes a bit more effort on her part to calm Sidi down. Come on, ma chère, let's get some fresh air, a walk through Berggarten. It's beautiful outside. Cups clink as the waiter clears them away, coins clink as they're placed on the table. He's now at the very bottom of my list. Sidi finds it necessary to make this final fierce pronouncement before the 2 women, both of them quite elegant, leave the cafe and are absorbed into the late afternoon bustle. It's raining a few days later when Sidi is once again on her way to see Freud. She had to make a real effort to go to her piano lesson that morning, and she definitely has to force herself to go to Freud in the afternoon. His most recent interpretations have hit her hard, even though she doesn't want to show it, and she is still trying to pretend that his treatment is having some positive results. She wants to do it right in order to stop her parents from worrying, and in particular to placate father. If only the professor would tell father that nothing has happened between her and Leonie, and that she is still an innocent. That would mollify him, and she could leave the couch behind. And then, in due time, she'd somehow arrange everything with Leonie. Maybe she'll endure until the summer holidays, and then she could enjoy her stay on Brioni. But she isn't there now, and for the umpteenth time, she climbs the broad staircase at Berggasse 19, Freud's consulting room. Freud senses Sidonie's aversion and reluctance regarding his analytical treatment. This is based more on an instinct he's acquired during years of analysing patients than on any clear evidence of resistance. The Silag girl chats cheerfully and seems rather detached, and yet he cannot get a handle on her. But this doesn't surprise him. She's not sick, hasn't come to him on her own, and never complains about her condition. And if she doesn't want to change, then changing her version of sexuality into a different one would be as difficult as turning a fully developed heterosexual into a homosexual. After having explored her family, Freud wants to build a bigger picture of her milieu. And at the beginning of this session, he asks her about her schooling and her female friends. She eventually runs out of stories and has no idea what else to talk about. Moreover, she doesn't dream, and Freud insists on dreams. Does the professor suspect that she meets Leonie regularly? She hopes not, but perhaps she can give reality a helpful tweak and distract him from any inconvenient ideas. And so she presents her meetings with Leonie as if they were dreams, adding a few details to complete the fiction of a good girl who yearns for her beloved, but is sticking bravely to her promises. Freud notes at this juncture, warned through some slight impression or other, I told her one day that I did not believe these dreams, that I regarded them as false or hypocritical, and that she intended to deceive me just as she used to deceive her father. I was right. After this exposition, this kind of dream ceased. With our dreamer, the intention to mislead me, just as she used to with her father, certainly emanated from the pre-conscious, or perhaps even from consciousness. It could come to expression by entering into connection with the unconscious wish impulse to please her father or father substitute, and in this way, it created a lying dream. It doesn't occur to Professor Freud that he might have been lied to on purpose. Over to you, Stella.
Thank you. Okay, so a little later on, she's spending a bit more time with him. Got to summer. Professor Freud also longs for the summer holidays. He will go to his favourite spa, Bad Gastein, and his sister-in-law Minna has agreed to come along. He hopes Martha, his wife, will be well enough to join them, but she hasn't fully recuperated from a terrible flu. At the end of the summer, he might go to Italy or Switzerland, 2 months without shop talk and not a word about analysis. That is true relaxation. And for the therapists among us, that's a 2-month therapy break. Not allowed anymore. Only his youngest daughter, Anna, will not join them this year. She has plans to spend the summer with the Brie family on Königssee, and he doesn't want to spoil her fun. The mother of that family, the lovely Melanie Ree, has been a motherly friend to her during these past months, and Anna is also very close to their daughter, Margarethe. Anna is his joy. He has been analysing her for the past 6 months, and she will follow in his footsteps and continue his life's work. Love is the only thing that hasn't been working out for her, but there are no men in her life. Almost like that Silig girl. But he doesn't want to let the disagreeable thought underlying that idea come to the surface. He will close the Silig case. There is no point in continuing to struggle with the girl. She has built up a strong resistance, which he failed to notice for the longest time, and he can't get through to her. It's obvious that this parallels her behaviour with her father, and it's quite obstructive. On the one hand, there's the compliant good girl who is trying hard to please, but beneath that is an iron will determined to get what she wants in life. He will suggest that she continue her treatment with a woman, if the parents wish. This has been an interesting experience for him, however, and it will be incorporated into future research and writings. For now, he just has to note the outcome of her analysis. And these are his words. The analysis went forward without any signs of resistance. The patient actively participating intellectually, though absolutely tranquil emotionally. Once, when I expounded to her a especially important part of the theory, one touching her nearly, she replied in an inimitable tone, "Oh, how interesting," as though she were a grande dame being taken over a museum and glancing through her lorgnon at objects to which she was completely indifferent. In the case of our patient, it was not doubt, but the effective factor of revenge on her father that made her cool reserve possible. In reality, she transferred to me the deep antipathy to men which had dominated her ever since the disappointment she had experienced through her father. So I broke off the treatment as soon as I recognized the girl's attitude to her father and gave the parents the advice that if it was thought worthwhile to continue the therapeutic efforts, they should be carried out by a woman doctor. The girl had, in the meanwhile, promised her father that at any rate she would not communicate with the lady, and I do not know whether my advice, the motive for which is obvious, will be followed. Freud tells Sidonie of his conclusions during their first session following the summer holidays, and she heaves an inner sigh of great relief. She has done what was required of her and shown her father that she was well-intentioned, but not everything can be changed. If the professor will make that clear to her father, and if he adds that Leonie has never knocked her off the straight and narrow path and into her bed, then father will be reassured and will leave her in peace. If that happens, everything really will have turned out for the best once again. As they're saying their goodbyes, Professor Freud remarks, "You have such shrewd eyes. I would never want to have you as an enemy." For the rest of her life, Sidonie will remember that it is just that is what the famous Professor Sigmund Freud said to her when she was just 19 years old. Thank you. So, Jane, here's my Freud. Obviously, Freud's books are vast. This case, the psychogenesis of a case of homosexuality in a woman, written in 1920. So there are pieces in this that are not appalling. I mean, they're not, you know, he's not being horrendous. He's not totally dismissing the possibility that homosexuality is a thing. He was really early on, he was saying, look, it's normal for all sorts of people. Unfortunately, we live in a society that is saying that it's not okay. And he had all his Oedipal theories and all the theories around why we might be queer. But he's also writing something, for example, towards the end of this, in addition to their manifest heterosexuality, a very considerable measure of latent or unconscious homosexuality can be detected in all normal people. This is in 1921. A very considerable measure of latent or unconscious homosexuality can be detected in all normal people. He talks about normal people because, you know, he pathologizes everything, so we'll have to let him have that. He talks about normal people as if bisexuality is a norm. Just their world is making it impossible, as still much of our world is. He's not all wrong, is he? I mean, you know more about psychodynamics than I do. My training is an existential, and we don't even believe in the subconscious. But he's not entirely wrong, but he just applies it so weirdly to her.
He does. I mean, and what you say is correct. He saw and considered, he wrote that he considered homosexuality and heterosexuality to be on equal footing. And yet, you know, in this paper and in others that I've read about femininity, read that for fun, he capitulates to, you know, sort of cis heteropatriarchy and in the views of the time. And it's really, he's a bit of a slippery fish, really. Like, you can't really pin him down. And as I say, I'm not an expert, but I do think it's kind of difficult to get a bit of a handle on him. Even he himself said, you know, towards the end of his life that, you know, he had changed his mind about lots of things, but he just seems to apply it so inconsistently. And I think there's something for me in the paper about how there's something about the fact that he can't, the patient doesn't adore him. You know, he can't get he can't get a purchase on her, because he did do analysis with another lesbian about 10, 12, 13 years later called HD, who you may know of, who's the bisexual imagist poet who was married to Breyer. And she literally, I mean, very unlike the starting of this analysis where, you know, it's dad that gets in touch saying, convert my daughter, essentially. And, you know, unlike with HD, who literally is running to Vienna and just saying, please, please, daddy, mummy, because he, you know, she referred to him as both mummy and daddy. And she's also a good deal older. She's sort of in her 30s, I think, and he's obviously a little bit older. Maybe he's had a bit more time to mellow, but she absolutely adores him. And she loves all of his little, you know, Egyptian sort of icons, and they share this love of kind of Egyptology. And she writes a whole book about her, you know, her work with him. And they, you know, and he really accepted her and was really, you know, they had a fantastic relationship and outcome, which was long lasting, I gather. But, you know, for this woman, this young woman, he, you know, he just doesn't like her. And
I think that's something about the youth as well, isn't it? So he wants a transference to happen. He wants her to be in love with him, as he believes she must have been in love with her father, and that's the problem, that it wasn't transferred properly. For him, in order to fulfill the prophecies of his theories, if she can't fall in love with him, then it can't work, because he's forming these theories as he's writing them. I mean, he also has a paper on Da Vinci, where he genuinely believes that Da Vinci is a great artist because he is sublimating his homosexuality. And same with Michelangelo, and that because Da Vinci's a good homosexual because he's not having sex with the young men he fancies. That makes him a good one. Ideal, that's his phrase, ideal homosexual. So it's fine to be homosexual as long as you don't act on it. It's a bit like the Catholic Church. And he does want to. This is the difficulty I have with Freud, because I don't think, you know, I think he's been so dismissed without also looking at his time as we need to look for them. There was a huge rise of anti-Semitism. He's Jewish. He's working with Jewish clients because he's Jewish, because of the rise of anti-Semitism. So it's not like many non-Jewish people are coming to him. He needs to be careful about what he's saying about what's going on. And there's a lot of writing that suggests that actually there was a vast amount of abuse going on, fathers, daughters, all sorts of horrendous stuff, that he then changed his tune about and said, oh, it wasn't abuse, it was the girls fantasizing it, because what was going to happen otherwise was the Jewish community was going to be accused of being a community in which incest was happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I think that in terms of the anti-Semitism, he didn't really reflect on his own internalized anti-Semitism apparently until towards the end of his life, when he'd left Vienna. So maybe it didn't feel possible. Maybe it was a blind spot for him.
I mean, it's one of the really interesting things about the book is how they contrast the politics and the history with her own, Gretel's actual life. But back to her actual life, talk about the queer ancestry bit a little. I think we've got time for that, because, you know, this is your grandmother in this book,
yeah,
right? And it's kind of phenomenal to have that lineage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to read the extract of that in a bit, which will be thrilling for me to read about my grandmother having sex. And yeah, I mean, I went to Vienna when I was at Diva to do a press trip to find out all the, you know, the gay riches and lesbian riches and queer riches that the city had to offer. And then I went to the bookshop, Löwenherz, which is the, you know, Viennese equivalent of Gay's a Word. And I'd rung up in advance saying, you know, I'm here for a weekend. I'd love to meet some people who are, you know, doing things in Vienna. And Ines was one of them. It was just such a delight to meet her. She was just such a wonderful person, you know, just generosity and interest and, you know, love just oozed from her. And she really very sweetly took me under her wing, just, you know, for the time I was there, and showed me different places that, you know, my ancestors lived. And when she told me that, you know, the names of the people that Sidonie had been, or Gretel had been involved with, you know, I recognized my family name, and it completely knocked me for six. And my dad didn't even know. So you know, he was quite frail by that point, and so I rang up Mum and just said, "You're not going to believe this. Dad's mum was a swinger," and I said, just make a decision about whether you're going to tell him if he's, you know, sitting down or whatever. You know, you might want to take your time. And then 4 hours later, she texted back saying, "I've told him. He's thrilled. He's delighted. He's surprised. He's shocked. But you know," and so that was really interesting for him to know, you know, to get more insight into his mother. You know, she obviously never discussed that, and that's really interesting in itself. It's just this kind of coincidence of me finding out about my queer ancestor. Had it not been for meeting Ines, and I wouldn't have known. I mean, this, you know, if I hadn't been on that weekend, you know, if I hadn't met her, if she hadn't been around, I would never have known. Or it's unlikely. I mean, maybe, who knows? But to have found that out is, you know, is life-changing, really. To have that queer ancestry, to grow up in a family where, you know, as far as you're aware, nobody else is, and then to suddenly know that, you know, it sort of thickens the threads that hold you, you know, back to the people behind you and behind you and behind, and somehow, I suppose it made me feel, even though I was the editor of Viva, even though I had made my whole life, you know, a project of you know, being a professional homosexual, I still, you know, I believe very few of us escape internalized homophobia and lesbophobia, and so to have that validation, I suppose, and you know, I was thinking about how, you know, this idea of mirroring, and how when we grow up in families where as queer people, where in heterosexual families where, you know, we might have lots of things mirrored back to us, but we won't have that. We won't have, you know, queer love mirrored back to us. So we don't have that sort of embodied sense of that and what that feels like to be around, and to feel that, you know, the texture of it almost. And so I think that, you know, that's part of that's my view anyway. That's part of what is, you know, contained in internalized, you know, homophobia or internalized lesbianism, lesbophobia rather.
I think that's something really, Joan, I think there's something really interesting about that, though, that there's a concept, of existential psychotherapeutic concept around what we are in the present, that it doesn't go past, present, future, that how we actually live is we live towards the future from the past that we know, and that changes the present. But when we have a different attitude to our past from the present, it also changes the past. So what you've said when you said thickening the thread behind you is that what you discovered in this present in Vienna, it changed your past, a lived past that you had experienced, but it changes it for you because it brings an entirely new perspective to it. That's
completely. And I think that, you know, collectively as queers, we all share this lack of mirroring, you know, this lack of mirroring in, you know, in for many of us in our families, if they're heterosexual, and also, you know, culturally, socially. And so I think that, you know, that's why it's so great to have places where we can mirror ourselves back to ourselves, you know, and see ourselves reflected back, you know, in art, in film, in books, you know, between us, each other, you know, and also I do believe that, you know, law of averages, I do believe that we do have queer ancestors, and, you know, we might not know it, but for sure we do. And I think that, you know, for me, I've done a lot more thinking about queer ancestry and how, you know, how much we can take from that knowledge, even if we don't know yet that we have queer ancestors. I think there's a huge strength in that you know, that can help us.
Okay, so that's a nice lead into something that is much more weird. So what interests me about a lot of the things that are in this book is that there's a couple of sections that are in 1921. In 1921, my mum was born in a shared house in Kennington, the daughter of a woman who had been in service since the age of 11. Down the road in Kennington were two women who had their own families and their own husbands and their own children, but once a year they went off together to a boarding house in Margate for a year. And when I came out, my mum told me about those two women. What I think is unfortunate is this book is only full of upper class queer women. And like a lot of the stories, like anything you ever come across of the Bloomsbury lot, what we're missing is the story of working class queer people. And we're always missing that story. Some of us have been trying to tell it for the entirety of our writing careers, but they're always missing because, of course, those people weren't given the permission to tell their own stories. However, there's some servants in this, and I think this is a nice bit because of the servant that's taking part. Okay, so Sidonie's not in this bit. This is Leonie, Carola, Gisela. I mean, there's loads of women here. All you really need is to know that there's a lot of partying going on. Leonie's savings. Leonie Puttkammer is the woman that Sidonie was first in love with from her teens. And frankly, I also think there's something dodgy going on there. I don't want to be saying that it's totally fine for a much older woman to be flirting with a underage child, which is exactly what she was doing. And I actually find that quite devious too. Their times, all of that, but even so, we wouldn't be okay if it was a man. Leonie's savings were disappearing quickly, however, and she started to accumulate debts. The love between Leonie and Carola was flourishing, and they spent many a steamy night together. But someone was going to have to pay the bills. If necessary, it would be a man. Gisela, who was many things in her capacity as lady's maid, but never as chaperone, received a detailed tally each morning, or so she recalled during interrogation 2 years later, of the number of times the lovers had had sex the previous night. With each account, the total was always in double digits. She was assured that each one had been a good fuck. But the lovers' erotic repertoire was apparently in need of expansion. And Gisela, she's probably Gisela, isn't she? But I'll go with Gisela. And Gisela, taking her job title literally, though not in a conventional manner, arranged for some companionship. One day she returned to the hotel with a big pickle jar of water containing two rather bewildered looking small grey tench. Look what I got for us. My sister recommends it highly, much in vogue with the ladies here in Berlin. Come on, tell us what those icky creatures are for, Carola urged. Ladies, please follow me to the bathroom, Gisela said, laughing so hard she had to be careful not to drop the jar. Carola and Leonie followed, one bursting with curiosity, the other a bit reserved. After all, one really shouldn't be so chummy with the help. Gisela filled the bidet with water, emptied the tench into it, and watched them begin to swim around more freely. Little did they know it wouldn't last. My ladies, would you please undress? By now, Carola and Leonie understood. Giggling, blushing slightly, and uttering mock protests, they undressed and listened as Gisela explained what to do. Get a tight grip on the gills, head underwater, tail up, insert with caution. This was a new experience for the tench as well, which doubtless had no idea how much pleasure its struggle for survival was imparting. When the initial protests turned to soft sighs, there was some pushing and shoving to be next in line. When the first fish grew exhausted and stopped thrashing its tail, the other provided new energy and new orgasms. And then in brackets, how precisely one puts a slippery fish to use as a predecessor of the modern vibrator shall forever remain a mystery. These and other pleasures of the ladies' wildlife in Berlin in January and February 1923 were dulled only by Albert Gessman's almost daily letters and telegrams from Vienna as he pulled out all the stops in his bid to convince Leonie to return. Reading these, Vienna usually lets slip a few derogatory remarks, then put them away in a drawer, but her lack of funds eventually moved her to give in. Thank you.
Thanks, Stella. So, final extract. Now it's 3 years after the Tench incident, and we find Sidie in the spring of 1926, and she's invited by my grandmother, Mariana, to the apartment she lives in Prague with her husband, my grandfather, and my dad, who was then 2 years old, and completely not mentioned in this. Sidie is now 26, and without giving too much away, the impact of heteronormative expectations has already had a devastating impact on her. So she's recuperating and trying to have fun with my gran, who is a year younger than Sidie. And basically, they are still having parties, like the other ladies, and in Prague rather than Vienna, and playing bridge in cafes. And yeah, lots of parties. One afternoon, something happens for which even hours later, Sidonie cannot find an explanation. The previous evening, they'd been out visiting and had not returned home until the wee hours. The morning routine took its usual course, but after lunch, instead of having coffee, an afternoon nap is proposed. A friend of Mariana's is visiting, and the 3 women retire to Mariana's bedroom. Sidonie is indeed tired, and she's the first to sink onto the pink silk coverlet on the extra large bed and doze off. She wakes as the sound of giggling, whispers, and soft sighs grows louder. Irritated, she turns her head and can't believe that what she's longed for years, has fantasized about, is happening right next to her. She would have only had to stretch out her hand to take part in the women's game, but she's frozen, mesmerized by the beauty of the situation, the appalling nature and vibrant eroticism of the moment, and her own indignation. The 2 women kiss wildly until, gently, passionately, Mariana pulls her girlfriend closer and lowers her lips to her neck. Long dark hair cascades around them, both covering and revealing the intensity of their desire. At first unaware that they're being watched, when they do notice, there are a few light-hearted remarks, an invitation, a joke, some come-hither glances. Propped stiffly on her elbow, Sidonie remains immobile and just shakes her head. The girlfriend slowly pulls her hand from Mariana, gets up, smooths her dress, and says, "Show her." She throws one last glance at Sidonie, gives a deep, soft chuckle, and closes the door behind her. Slowly, Mariana turns towards the still frozen Sidonie and stretches out her arms. Her unbuttoned blouse opens to reveal large, soft breasts between a lacy camisole. As Mariana reaches out to embrace her friend, Sidonie thinks for just a moment that what she is seeing, this pale, fine skin and thick hair, this sensuous mouth already pressed against hers, is beautiful. Then, suddenly Leonie is there, and Sidonie stabbed by an intense, sharp pain. In order to ward off thoughts of what never was, Sidonie responds to the kisses much more vehemently than she intended. And they definitely taste better than her first boyfriend's. But all the while, she feels lost and small and doesn't know what to do with the longing that's focused on her. Mariana is experienced, and what she's showing her, she can't have learned with her husband. In no time, Sidonie is embracing a naked woman who knows how to direct Sidie's hand, who knows what she wants. But when Mariana tries to reciprocate, her hands are pushed away. Sidonie allows no touching, no caresses. Her desire ebbs and turns to fear when it's her turn. She lives only in her devotion to others. As Mariana heaves a final sigh beneath her and falls back onto the pillows, Sidonie feels like laughing, as happens so often at the most inappropriate moments. This is what everyone goes so crazy about? We're just like animals. All the effort, the sighing, the longing. How absurd. These are the thoughts running through her head. Poor old thing. Young thing.
She's really young then, but it's like you were talking about the internalized homophobia earlier. They're living such a difficult life. According to the book, she doesn't pay attention to the rise of anti-Semitism until really, really late, and is very fortunate to get out at all. But it's almost as if there's this kind of blinkered life where she's lesbian or she's asexual towards lesbianism. she's not looking at the fact that the rise of Nazism means that despite being baptized Catholic, it's not going to make any difference in the long run. She's wanting to live this sort of sybaritic life of beauty and joy and playfulness, but the world won't let her.
Yeah, and it's strange, isn't it? Because her brothers are much more clued up about the sort of political situation, and maybe they're expected to be because they're men, and because they're also more involved in the world because they're involved in the business, and she isn't. She doesn't work. You're talking about your family and your ancestors, you know, working from being kids. She doesn't work. She didn't get her first job until, when is it? I mean, sort of her 30s.
Which frankly must have been really bloody hard if you've never worked and you don't work until your 30s. And you know, and even then she ends up doing jobs because she's not been trained to do a job. You know, she's not been helped to become someone who can understand that she's useful. And there's this real sadness to the character towards the end of her life, where she's trying to make a life, and she is an artist. You know, she becomes a visual artist, but she doesn't understand how she can be of agency in the world. And that is one of the problems of privilege, because so often it's stultifying for people when they don't realize, not saying it's not better than working at 11, but they don't realize that there is privilege of their own that has nothing to do with the money, nothing to do with everything else. They don't understand that they can create their own agency, and it takes us such a long time to realize that.
Yeah, it's sad. I ended up, it's interesting actually, I ended up feeling that when Freud writes about her, I feel protective towards her. I feel kind of critical of the way that he's treating her you know, it feels like there's a lot about him and his ideas and his prejudices. And knowing more about her, I find her quite unsympathetic. But I also want to think about her, you know, from an empathic place. You know, if you are brought up, you know, in a hideously anti-Semitic environment where, you know, interesting to think about conversion as well. Conversion therapy, you know, that is asked of Freud, of her, and also her family conversion to Catholicism. So these kind of passing quality to her life. Taking all of that in, taking the anti-Semitism and the lesbophobia in. The only way that she, you know, I suppose, felt like she had any status was through her money, and so, you know, and through her, and so she becomes this. She's a bit of a snob, basically, isn't she? And you know, that's the thing that she uses to sort of lift herself up internally, and she has to sort of denigrate other Jews and Jewishness, and she's not attracted to Jewish women, and they have to look a certain way, and, you know, be very elegant, and etc., etc. And you just think, gosh, everything's very surface.
She's the kind of character we wouldn't be allowed to write as a fiction writer, because everyone's got to be bloody sympathetic, which is so irritating and so unreal. I mean, she's very real except that by the end of it, I feel like Freud. I don't know if I've got a hold on her either, and I'm not entirely sure if they did. Despite the fact that it's written by two people that she's told her story to, it's still her telling. And each one of us, doesn't matter how honest we want to be, we're telling from within it, which is a very different place to tell a story. You can't genuinely ever have that kind of 360 you might get from outside, but you never, even if you desperately want to be fully honest about yourself, you're telling it from your own vision. It's never going to be that. So I was thinking about this earlier today, and then thinking about the Freud paper. In both the book and in the Freud paper, I'm left thinking, who is she really? And I think that's really interesting, because I don't want a book to pin it down for me, though. I want to be thinking, who is she really?
Yeah, and sort of Freud makes the whole analysis end with a bang, doesn't he? By just this kind of like slap round the face of just like, I wouldn't want you for my enemy. I just think, wow, you know, I bet she was pleased to leave slam the door behind her. But I was also just thinking about, you know, why did he take the case on? And then I did a bit, because I was just thinking today it'd be quite unethical to take on, you know, we wouldn't do it. I mean, you know, if you're approached by a father for somebody of that age, you would say, you know, I need to hear from your, you know, kids if they want to come to therapy or not. And, you know, if they do, then fine. And if I don't, I'm not going to take somebody on, you know, a young adult like that. I don't work with children. But this was quite common, you know, in his era. You know, the Dora case is similar. You know, a father is asked Freud to take on his 17 or 18-year-old daughter for highly unethical reasons. You know, basically the father is having an affair with a woman, and he wants his daughter to be open to the advances of the husband of the woman he's having an affair with. Are you keeping up? So basically, you know, he wants his daughter to have an affair with his mistress's husband. And it's, you know, you just think, what? One little aside, at the time of this analysis, it's 1919, it's the end of the First World War, and there's very little money around. And so I think it's in the book that it says that he was being paid in, he was accepting payments in potatoes and Havana cigars. And, you know, there's not much cash around. So, you know, Margarethe's dad, rich dad, comes along with cash, you know, and pays him $10 a session, which is the equivalent of £144. So, you know, maybe he needed the cash.
Which I think might be a nice time to go to the audience and see if other people have questions now.
Yeah, good idea.
Freud,
yeah.
I think Freud needed the cash is a pretty good line to end on there.
And thanks to both Stella and Jane for those readings and amazing discussions. If you've got any questions, you can post them in the comments, or if, bearing in mind that this event is being recorded, you're more than welcome to ask your question verbally and come into the meeting. And to do that, if I could just ask you to raise your hand digitally, or actually, if you wish, and you can raise it digitally by just going into the participants icon on the bottom of your screen. But first of all, we're just going to come to a couple of questions that have been asked in the comments section. This one's from Gillian Proctor. How much do you think Freud suffered from confusion about who his client was? Siddy's parents paid him and they wanted the analysis, yet it's Siddy he works with. Jane, do you want to take that one?
Confusion. Can you repeat the question?
How much do you think Freud suffered from confusion about who his client was? Siddy's parents paid him and wanted the analysis, yet it's Siddy he works with.
So this is a question about who he's writing the paper for, or
confusion about who's client, who the client is, whether or not the parents paying who wants the analysis and wants the resolution to the issue, perhaps as they see it, or is it Siddy herself?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, maybe that's a good question, and maybe his paper and the way that he wrote about it, you know, suggests that he was trying to, I don't know, I mean, he was trying to basically describe or give an account of homosexuality, and you know, I think that's always been a problem, hasn't it? That gay, you know, we have to give an explanation or a justification for why we are how we are. And so, you know, that in that way we're othered and made, you know, abnormal. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Maybe I'm confused, but I know that when I read the paper have in the margin here that he basically thinks that lesbians are infantile, mannish narcissists, which
met one or two of them.
Yeah.
Jane, there's a question from Veronica Kohler, who just wants to learn a little bit more about your grandmother and the connection there. Are you comfortable telling us a little bit more about her?
What does she want to know?
Yeah, the question simply is, who was Jane's grandmother?
Well, she was a woman called Mariana Kraus, and she was brought up in Vienna, in central Vienna, and she was. It seems like she was. I don't know very much about her. I've got a picture of her, but I don't know much about her. I didn't ever meet her. She died when she was in her sort of mid-40s. She escaped to the UK with my dad just before the Second World War, and she also didn't work until she came to the UK. She didn't need to. She had a wealthy family. I understand that she may have been she worked in a hairdresser's when she got here, or as a receptionist, and she. I'm not sure about her queerness. I mean, she wouldn't have. I don't know who she would have spoken to about it. I don't know how she would have identified. I know that she married somebody else, a man, when she got to the UK. I have a sense that maybe her parents thought that she was a bit wayward, and they arranged this marriage to my grandfather. And she wasn't, according to the book, I mean, it says in the book here that she wasn't that into him, but then sort of made herself be into him. I think it was expected that she should marry. But it's really interesting. I mean, I didn't know all of the stuff that I read in this book. I didn't know anything about her, and I got such a sense of her her liveliness and aliveness and her talent. She moved from Vienna to Prague. She picked up Czech really quickly. She seemed very confident. She certainly seemed sexually, very comfortable. And so that was really kind of inspiring for me. It was lovely to read about her and to think about, how she managed and how she lived, in quite a confident way.
Okay, so we have a somebody who's raised their hand. So I'm going to come to you, Ellie, if you're I'm not sure how to pronounce your name properly. If you're happy to speak.
Okay, I put the question in chat, and I'm actually going to try and read it from there.
Hi, Ellie.
Hiya, how you doing?
Yeah.
The question is, I'm reading this story. Do either you or Stella have any feeling about Sidonie being butch or femme? And if you do, does that change the way that you receive that story? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense. I don't, and I say that as somebody who has often been called femme by other people, and it's not a term that I have chosen for myself.
Okay.
So I find it uncomfortable to consider that I might do it to somebody else if they hadn't taken the label for themselves. So it's not, no, I didn't actually. I very much see her as somebody who, There's also Gillian's earlier question here, which I can see, how much do you think it was Sidonie's story and how much was the author's perception of her, which I think joins up with this, because I just don't know. I don't know if she's got Ines and Diana around her little finger and that's what she's telling us. I don't have a clear picture of her from what they're telling us, but I can tell that they're both completely besotted with her from what they're telling us, which makes me uncertain if we're getting, as I said earlier, the full story, the true story, or Sidonie's story, Gretel's story, the story she wants to be told of her, which I suspect is quite likely given her age when they were doing this. She was well into her 90s, I think, by the time they started talking to her. Which means that I personally don't feel comfortable about labeling her as anything other than a woman who clearly preferred the company of women, had men lovers, though she told Ines and Diana that she didn't like sex with them, didn't perceive herself to be hugely sexual at all. But how do we know if that's to do with internalized lesbophobia or the world that she's living in? You know, she's not living in a culture that allows her to even explore the sexuality that she might have. So yeah, none of the labels are working for me for her, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think about it in that respect, Ellie. But what I did feel very strongly was that I think that the Freud, her experience with Freud really had a really bad impact on her, and I think that it really ruined her life. Maybe I'm overstepping the mark there, but I've heard on YouTube, on in the public domain, there's a little snippet of 2 minutes of conversation that Ines did with Gretel, in her 90s. I don't speak German that well, but she is basically, you can tell from the tone of her voice, she is still literally on her deathbed talking about what an arse he was and how much she hated him, and that she was disgusted by what he said, and I think that what he suggested really cut deep and really played a huge and twisted the knife in what already was very, very difficult kind of circumstances for her to be, fully able to enjoy her love and desire. And I think that, given how much she the strength of the distress in her voice at the end of her life, she carried that pretty much, I'm sure, to her grave. And I think that, that's my theory anyway.
Thank you.
There's a really interesting question that's come in into the comments from Carrie Patterson Doppelhaus. I'm going to read through this slowly. Coming back to Jerry's point about the importance of having these visceral stories about queer lives for people to mirror, I wonder if the speakers could expound on the different benefits of memoir versus biography versus historical fiction versus queer contemporary fiction, in their benefits to queer readers. So I guess it's looking at genres and the assets that can be derived from those different forms. What would you like to see more of? What are we missing in the literary landscape? Maybe over to you, Stella, if you're happy taking this one.
Yeah, I would like to see more of everything. I think what we're missing is queer contemporary fiction, particularly contemporary fiction about queer women. I've been saying this since 1994, when my first novel, which was queer contemporary fiction, came out. Not least because we seem to be pretty good at lesbians in historical costume. We'll allow that. Seriously, we'll allow it on telly, we'll allow it on film. I mean, Gentleman Jack's brilliant and exciting and marvelous, but fuck me, could we see that now? I find it heartbreaking that gay men have managed many, heartbreaking, but hey, patriarchy and feminism didn't happen, so not a surprise, just heartbreaking. I find it heartbreaking that gay men's work has managed all of these crossovers into every genre in a way that queer women's work hasn't as yet. And we are, I'd say, a good 20 years behind achieving that prominence. We would have needed feminism to happen because, of course, the people who are writing and winning prizes are still predominantly men. The people who are translating things into television and film are still predominantly men. But I would really, really like to see, yes, white gay men's work, great point, Robert, absolutely. I would really like to see lesbians out of historical costume happening more often. And that's not to say that the lesbians in historical costume aren't amazing, because, you know, I've written some of them too, and they are amazing. But we're permitted when we're dressed up. We're not permitted like this. You know, we're not shown like this. So I want more of that. I mean, how many copies of Shuggy Bainey are you selling today, tomorrow, Uli? You know, it is happening. You know, I mean, yes, it's a white man, but it's working class. You know, I want working class queer stories everywhere. But I tell you, that book's going to take, I reckon, at least another 10 years before a woman does the same.
Mm.
Seriously, I mean, we're so far behind, and I mind when people go, it's okay for gay people, and yeah, quite right, Robert. White gay people, sure, some white gay people, not necessarily working class white gay people, definitely not trans white people. You know, we're not there, and the attitude that it's fixed and it's done now, definitely not done. There's a lot more work to be done. A lot.
Yeah, I would agree. And also, you know, queer people of color stories as well. You know, I mean, there are so few of those, and we really need to see so much more of that stuff written by queer people of color. You know, whether gay, lesbian, trans, and as you say, you know, so few are actually written by lesbians or lesbians of color or trans women of color. So much of the storytelling is, if it is at all, is by white gay men, and it is great that it's white working class gay men, but there needs to be more lesbians and bi women and trans people and people of color. So I think that's what we're missing.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, there's somebody saying girl, woman, other.
Yeah, totally girl, woman, other, and Bernadine, but
yeah.
Bernadine, in what she calls her lesbian phase, wasn't winning these prizes. Bernadine had to get to 61 to win the prize, and then they only bloody gave it to her with Margaret Atwood. Now, Bernadine's work has been phenomenal for decades, and it's taken this long. So just because it's happened now does not make up for those decades that she wasn't getting his accolades. And not only getting accolades, but supporting so many other writers. That work that she's done, only other writers really know the work that she's done to support writers. It's been going on for a long time. But, you know, it's taken this long. It's brilliant that it's happened, but we shouldn't have to keep waiting so long. Sorry, that's a bit depressing, isn't it? Oh, well.
Tell it. Tell it. Real talk.
I guess I'd like to maybe ask a question, and I don't know if either Jane or Stella, you maybe want to bring in Alison, who we had from at the top of the event, and access some knowledge there. Reading the early chapters of the book where she begins to get obsessed, and there's the rejection and the suicide attempt, I guess I felt the beautiful way the authors of this book have put it together. Sidonie felt present to me. I mean, we can think about, I know, people, an historical memoir as kind of, I mean, they say the past is a foreign country, people do things differently there, but she very much feels like a person with agency and with, I know, with emotions and desires, and you can feel it through the pages of this book. Could you both tell me a little bit about kind of who you felt Sidonie is, and what you felt about her kind of reading this book?
Well, I mean, I said that I found I found her a bit unsympathetic, you know, because of her internalized anti-Semitism and her snobbishness, really. And but I also feel for her because of those two things. And she clearly, you know, she knew very clearly that she did not want to marry a man, even though she knew she was expected to. And she was definitely somebody, I mean, you know, she tries to commit suicide 3 times. And you know, because she's because of heteronormative expectations of her, which is, you know, and the way she does it, I'm not going to go into detail, but she, you know, she really means business. And that's quite, you know, that it's there's lots of very big gestures on her part, you know, but they're not just gestures. Beyond that, you know, she really she doesn't do things by halves. She's a very defiant character, I think. And you know, you really feel like when she does leave Vienna, she does sort of find herself in a way that she couldn't in Vienna, perhaps, you know, in the way that many people do, and they can be a version of themselves that they couldn't be in the place where they came from, especially if you're queer or lesbian. And so that's quite interesting to me, you know, how she makes friends. And she's clearly, you know, she's not an unsympathetic person, because she clearly makes, you know, some very great friends. People love her. You know, people are very devoted to her and she to them. And, you know, she has these animals in her life as well, who she's devoted to, and, you know, gets great support from. And so I really enjoyed finding out about that and those aspects of her.
I want to show you her at the end. I think this is the interesting person. This person who is engaging Ines and Diana enough to make them want to make the book, is engaging with her story of herself. And God knows we'll all get to 90-something and our versions of our stories of ourselves will be true, untrue, and whatever the hell we want to tell, frankly. That she has enough to share and enough spirit to want to keep sharing it. That's what interests me about her. I have no idea what I think about her as a teenager, and you know, I certainly, I've had the great good fortune of having a 30-year relationship. For me, therefore, in a couple, in a society that is predicated on couples, I look at her life and think, oh, I would want that for her. But we don't know that she would want that for herself. She chose not to have it for herself when it was offered with someone that she loved. So I don't want to put my benefit of coupledom in a society that prefers couples onto her. But what I think is really interesting, that one, Mia? And there's her there. What I think is interesting about her is that she had a lot of constraints as well as a lot of privilege. She seems to have lived at least some of her life on her own terms. And perhaps as she got older, much more so. And that excites me. I think of my 92-year-old mother-in-law that my wife is a carer for, who's really struggling. And part of that is because she was a wife and mother for forever. From, you know, she worked as a young woman when she first came over from Calcutta, but after that she did wifing and mothering. She didn't Gretel Sidonie. She did a whole load of other things, and I do think that's probably quite good for our lives.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that, I mean, I just think it's fantastic that there is, you know, her story exists and we know it, and particularly as from what I said at the beginning about how in the case study, there's no, you know, you get so little of her. You get those 3 words, oh, how interesting. And that's pretty much it, isn't it, in terms of reported speech from her. And so this, you know, this ghost of a patient finally has her life filled out And I think that's just, you know, wonderful. And, you know, there's something very special about that, and very special about, you know, for history, you know, that we get to see, you know, more of this person who, you know, he made famous, but we didn't know who she was.
Can I just add, before I get told off by my wife, if she watches this, my mother-in-law did loads of amazing things, but part of her problem at 92 is that was what she was left with. Less agency, that's all. Also, I don't want the wives and mothers telling me off on Twitter, because, you know. Alison, do you want to say something about it?
I don't know, it's such a, I always come back to the thing of just history and how she lived through such a different era. And I was thinking when Jan Morris died, Jan was 94. And, you know, she was closer to Sidie than we were in any ways, and trying to keep that in mind the whole time. And yes, class and privilege makes a huge difference, but I don't know if Sidie would have traveled if she didn't have to leave Vienna because of Hitler and anti-Semitism, and she left as she didn't leave till 41, 42. So, you know, you just think, what an extraordinary woman. And as Jane says, how great it is that this biography is here. But whether Sidie actually got a grip on her life, I do wonder. And I think that's very much to do with the time she was living through, as well as, of course, herself and her ability to grab her life. And she didn't work till she was 30, so she never managed to really be very comfortable and secure financially, which is pretty dire. But yeah.
There's a question here from Henry Strick van Linschoten. There may have been an undertone of sibling rivalry in her life. Two brothers who in a patriarchal society and family most likely got the lion's share of attention and acknowledgement. Anything to say about that? Well, the book has a lot to say about it. And actually, this is one of my problems with the book. The book buys in to Freudian beliefs about families. I really struggle with the writers doing that with the story. So the book buys into the idea that the mother is frigid and cold and therefore it screws her up. The book buys into the idea that her mother preferred the baby brother to her, and that screwed her up. Now, those are massively damaging Freudian concepts about what mothers are supposed to be like. And I find it painful that they are reported and repeated, not just in Sidonie's words, but by the authors, because actually those are misogynist concepts that are Freudian misogynist concepts, that it's always the lack of a mother's love that's going to screw you up. And it's not. You know, we don't know if what she says about her mother in the book is true or not. We haven't got the mother's word for it. So it's quite possible there's sibling rivalry going on. It's also quite possible that she's one girl who's the apple of her dad's eye. And to some people, that would be amazing.
Yeah, and she, in the paper, it says that, in Freud's paper, I think, near the beginning, I think it says that the mother wasn't that bothered, essentially. You know, it was the father that had the problem with her, you know, potentially being a lesbian, but mother seemed not to be. And perhaps that was because I was thinking, you know, maybe that was because it meant that Sidie wouldn't be a threat in terms of, you know, being courted by men that the mother fancied.
I think I might think about bringing tonight's event to a close. I'm aware we're 10 minutes over, and I know more questions are coming through in the comments section. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening, and especially a big thank you to Jane and to Alison and to Stella. If you want to have a little, if you want to unmute yourselves, if people want to say hello to each other at the end of the meeting, I'm conscious that a lot of people isolating at home, and maybe there's not been a huge opportunity to have a bit of contact with people. So if people want to say hello to each other and have just a general "how you doing," please do, and have a little chat. And anybody who wants to stay for that can for a little while. But I'd like to bring the kind of formal part of tonight's event to a close. Thank you. If we could give a virtual round of applause to Stella, and to Jane, and to Alison. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Uli.
Thank you.
Thank you, Uli. Thank you, Gaze the Word. Well done for keeping on.
And
Yeah.
you can buy the book with us, of course. So links in the comments. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, Jane Trace.
Oh, it's Jane Trace there.
Yeah, all right.
Hello, Jane. I didn't see you.
Hi, Kate. There's loads of people I know here. It's cool.
Yeah.
Louise.
Well done.
Jane. Hello, Jane.
Hello, Jane.
It's lovely to see faces I've not seen for a very long time.
Yeah.
Very
Good
nice.
to see you.
Mind you, some of these people I see almost every day. Rats.
You're
No,
lucky.
it's great. Lovely, lovely, lovely. I'm sorry I was so late joining.
Great, you're here.
And the recording will be made available. Is this on the Gaze the Word website, Uli?
At the moment, it'll be on an iCloud, on a cloud somewhere, which I will try and kind of like capture and share. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to share it, but I'll certainly post about it on Twitter. So you'll be able to find the link there. Okay.
Great.
We'll probably put it up on YouTube. I'll let everybody know.
Great. Thanks, Uli.
Oh.
I'm just hanging out now. I'm going to have to go. Sorry, because I have to go at 8:30. Lovely to see you all. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got to go too.
Bye, people.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye
Bye.
for now.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jane.
Bye,
Thank
Jane.
you.
Bye, Mia. Who's left? Bye, Gillian.
I'm Mia.
Oh.
Good to see you, Alison.
Yeah, and you too.
Yeah, Jane.
Cheers, Janet. You're right.
I am. Well, I just love to see so many faces because isolation being what it is, it's just like, oh.
And early in the shop, working overtime.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a late end today. I've turned the shop into a bit of a kind of warehouse, so we're just kind of like fulfilling orders. Thank you for your order, by the way, Jane. And just sending books out all over. So it's really nice. Working during lockdown gives me a sense of purpose. I need it. So it's been great to be able to come in and run the website and speak to people on the phone and just keep the kind of like the home fires burning.
Have your sales increased over lockdown because people are indoors reading, or?
I mean, we've been very, very busy. It's been difficult to keep up with demand of orders to the site. So that's been amazing. Obviously, not making quite as much money having, sending the books out as you are people just coming in. But we've been really buoyant, and we've been really grateful for every part of how exhausted we feel, if that makes any sense.
No, I'm glad. Congratulations. I'm glad that you're keeping going. That's, yeah.
It's good. It's really good.
Such an important resource.
Thank you.